There we go. We're live there too. All right. I'm going to have a space in the next couple of days to test out some of the features on the Rumble Studio, mainly for like sharing screen and stuff like that and bringing people in, because I want to stop using StreamYard as like the front end feeder, which I have to do on regular podcasts because I haven't figured out how to let other people play with the presentation and stuff like that. So I'm going to have a time maybe on Saturday, like in the middle of the day, where we can just jump on there and play around with it. Maybe do like a mini research project in the meantime so we can tweak out the features. And I know that I can send the link to people privately, either through DMs on X or whatever, so that we could bring people in and out so I can get a little bit more comfortable with that. And that way I can ditch StreamYard. But anyway.
I'll be a guinea pig.
Well, StreamYard's more expensive. You have to pay for a membership to do that. Just like I had to upgrade my Rumble. And, you know, we don't make any money at this. So this is just money that's like flying out the window. So I had to, in order to be able to have multiple people on StreamYard, and they limit the membership that I bought to 50 hours. And so I'm constantly having to delete programs in order to film the next one. And I don't have a good like cataloging capability yet. And so blah, blah, blah. I have an external hard drive, but it needs to be organized. And I'm just not good at any of that stuff. So I've been putting that off, but I'm going to have to bite the bullet, invite my daughter over and get that fixed. All right, I see Bridget. There's cousin It. Let's get her a speaker. I had to go ahead and put SR71 as the co-host since the space already kicked me out 3 times. So, all right, we're going to rock and roll here, because tonight's Wednesday night, the night that I have to leave a little early. So we want to make sure we knock this chapter out and get our chit chat done. All right. So if you guys wouldn't mind reposting the space, and Bridget, if you wouldn't mind getting, I'm just going to say this up front, and for the people that are on Rumble, when they listen to the recording, if you could post the link to the t-shirts. I did want to give everybody an update. The second version of the t-shirt that we got quite a few pre-orders. The order went in today, and we should get the initial order of the t-shirt number 1 in the next day or 2. So as soon as we get them, we will take them to the post office and mail them all out. So that's the update on that. It'll take about 10 days from today to have t-shirt number 2. I still do not have the second side of the coin done yet, but the image, if I haven't shared it already, is going to be the eagle. So on the front side of the challenge coin is the eagle with the gladio sword clutched in its claws, like, you know, getting rid of gladio. The flip side of that, I don't know why this just came to me the other day, but it's kind of the perfect emblem, because I believe that a version of the Phoenix program has been part of Gladio. I think it was used as a model, and it was perfected both by the UK and Malaysia, and then, or Malay at the time, and then because they basically did everything that was done in the Phoenix program, and then I think the US kind of used the Phoenix program and perfected what the British had already done. And then they've used some version of that in all of these coups in the occupation afterwards, because they all look very much the same. And so the flip side of the coin is going to be an eagle, and looks like fighting the phoenix, but having the phoenix already caught in its talons as well. So that's going to be the flip side of the coin. And they're doing the mock-ups to that right now. We should have it in the next day or two. And then as soon as we agree that looks the way we want it to, we will get those done. And she said that will take about 2 weeks to have them. And then as soon as we finalize the design, we'll put those up for pre-order as well. So that's the update. All right. My daughter got mad at me because I told her I was going to do that yesterday and I didn't. So she come to pick up the baby and she's like, did you tell him? Did you tell him? And I'm like, no, I forgot. So there it is. There's the advertisement. The rest of the program is commercial free. All right.
I put the link up in the bill in the mega board.
Thank you.
Megatron or whatever you call
Whatever
it.
that thing is.
Yeah.
All right. Thank you very much. And SR71's already got it over on Rumble. You rock, dude. All right. Where we left off, they just totally messed up the Bay of Pigs. And we met William Polly again and his interactions with the 2506 fiasco. So one thing Kennedy had also told Eisenhower when they discussed the massive failure of the Bay of Pigs was that there was going to be an investigation, to the extent that there's ever an investigation of their stupid shit. But this investigation was done by a committee, of course, and it's called the Green Board. It was chaired by General Maxwell Taylor. And for those of you who don't remember the story, General Taylor was a military advisor to Kennedy while Lyman Lemonsker was the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. When Lyman Lemonsker got fired and moved over to NATO, quote unquote fired, General Taylor took his place. So you have General Taylor, Robert Kennedy, and Allen Dulles, who was there representing the CIA. Admiral Arleigh Burke was there to speak on behalf of the Navy and their role in it. The board held 20 hearings with witnesses that included the principal CIA and military participants from Bissell on down, plus several of the Cubans that did make it back and some of the quote unquote politicians that were going to make up the fake government. The declassified transcripts of the testimony reveal an oddly circumspect investigation. It could hardly have been otherwise. The details of the airstrike, the plans for Trinidad versus those for the Bay of Pigs, the military's consideration of the CIA plans were examined over and over again. Yet some of the central questions were not squarely confronted at all. Failure was attributed to the belief that this large operation could be conducted with plausible deniability within the guidelines of NSC 5412-2. It was also attributed to lack of coordination among the different agencies, to the attempt to command the operation from a distance. The panel concluded that the guerrilla operation had not in fact been available to the exiles, and that the Operation Pluto plan itself had marginal character, which increased with each additional limitation, but not actually rejecting the CIA plan outright. The chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, Taylor, seemed to have approved it and thus bore some responsibility. All U.S. agencies were at fault in failing to do everything possible to ensure the success of the plan. Well, no, not every organization that was involved in the plans allowed to do whatever's possible to make sure it succeeds. The U.S. military is not allowed to conduct operations, legally not allowed to conduct operations on behalf of the CIA. They're only ever allowed to provide logistical support by law. So The logistical support was your plan sucks, and they told them that, and taking them to the fight, not fighting for them, and bringing them home, which they did. The CIA came out looking much better because, of course, they blame everybody else and then hide all their secrets. Nothing was ever said about the absurdity of mounting an invasion plan in only 2 days, a month before actual implementation, and very little about the military feasibility of committing 1,500 Cuban exiles to a beachhead 36 miles wide. The report even observed, we do not feel that any failure of intelligence attributed significantly to the defeat. What the fuck? I'm sorry. That's just so crazy. How about the fact that the planes don't even match? You didn't have enough intelligence to know that the plane sitting on the ground in Cuba didn't look anything like this same model that you landed there and pretended that was theirs, that was exposed by the first junior reporter that took a picture of it. But that's not a military intel, or that's not a CIA intelligence failure. Okay, sure do. Let's see. That's just comical. In its recommendation, the Taylor report discussed possible establishment of a strategic resource group. Yeah, because we just need another layer of bureaucracy to cover up shit that we shouldn't be doing to begin with, consisting of a chairman, the DCI, and undersecretaries of state and defense. This was nothing less than the exact same thing that Eisenhower had that was referred to as the 5412 group. The report also recommended the military be given primary responsibility for paramilitary operations, with the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff as the normal avenue for presidential advice, and that an inventory of the U.S. paramilitary assets be conducted. So the problem with that is, for those of you who even care, the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff is only supposed to be there for advice. There is supposed to be zero operational units reporting to the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. It's like having your lawyer, if you worked for, I don't know, pick a company, IBM, and the lawyer is there to advise the chairman of IBM to stay out of legal trouble. The lawyer then goes and starts selling computers. That's literally the equivalent of what we're talking about. The chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff is supposed to be an independent fly on the wall for the president, so that the SecDef, who has the operational COCOMs underneath of him that conduct operations, he can have an independent view of those operations under the SecDef for their execution, to say, you know what, the SecDef is using CENTCOM to conduct operations in, I don't know, Iraq, but the plan really sucks, and you might want to look at that. That's the chairman's job, and he has an entire freaking staff to do that. He conducts zero operations. So the recommendation of putting paramilitary under the chairman is like flies in the face of the entire National Security Act that was written with the chain of command the way it was for government, for civilian oversight. It would eliminate the civilian oversight and have a general in charge of the paramilitary that did not report to the SecDef. So it's crazy on its face. So the President Kennedy responded to the recommendations with a National Security Action Memorandum 55 and 56. 55, in fact, appointed the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff for military type actions in time of peace as well as war. 56 ordered the recommended inventory of American assets for covert warfare. This instruction led to the interagency study directed by Richard Bissell with Walt Rostow, R-O-S-T-O-W, of the NSC as the prime moving force behind it. The study provided the impetus for the administration's emphasis on counterinsurgency techniques. Kennedy also revived one oversight unit, not the 5412 group, but the President's Foreign Intelligence Advisory Board, the prominent civilian group to which Clark Clifford and Gordon Gray were soon appointed. And you guys remember who Clark Clifford is? Clark Clifford is the guy that goes on to facilitate the CIA's BCCI bank buying illegally 3 different banks inside the United States. And a lot of other crimes, by the way. He was definitely one of the spokespersons in the political arena for the international syndicate. They met no less than 25 times between May and December of 1961. So half a year, 25 times in 6 months. They're meeting like on a weekly basis, planning basically Operation Gladio style shit. All right. So they end up with a whole bunch of recommendations. And though the CIA might not have looked so bad in the Taylor report, there is no question that the debacle stripped away the veneer that Dallas had added to the CIA, especially that of the Directorate of Plans. Kennedy had considered Allen Dulles a master spy and an asset to his administration. Now he did not. At lunch with Arthur Schlesinger and James Reston during the last days of the Pluto operation, the president said, quote, Dulles is a legendary figure, and it's hard to work with legendary figures, unquote. He kept Dulles on for a time until the completion of the new CIA headquarters at Langley. Then he fired him. Allen Dulles never set foot in the new building, the current CIA headquarters, as director of the CIA. It's like the ultimate slap in his face, actually, because he was largely in charge of building it and never allowed to go in it as the director. He got fired instead. Dulles retired and wrote his book, The Craft of Intelligence, in which the passage explaining away the Bay of Pigs contained only a few lines. Later, Dulles reacted angrily to the publication of the Schlesinger and Theodore Sorensen's memoirs on Kennedy and wrote several drafts of a reply which were never published. The rebuttal demonstrates, according to an analysis by political scientist Lucien Vanderbroek, that CIA officers consciously allowed President Kennedy to remain ignorant of the weaknesses of the Pluto plan with the expectation that JFK would have to go along with whatever it is that they had to do at the last minute to save the operation and save the exiles, which Kennedy refused to do. So in essence, they set Kennedy up. Henceforth, Kennedy kept the agency at arm's length. He told aides of his desire to splinter the CIA into 1,000 pieces and scatter it to the wind. But the actual agency shakeup was much less extreme. Richard Bissell was considered the leading candidate to succeed Dulles. Now he was asked to resign instead. When Bissell resisted, he was offered an inferior job. At the end of 1961, he left to head the Institute of Defense Analysis. Tracy Barnes was moved over to division chief of a newly created domestic operations division. Get that? Domestic operations division in an organization that is not allowed to operate domestically. E. Howard Hunt and Hans Tofte reported to Tracy Barnes in his new organization. Jerry Drawler, another Bay of Pigs guy, was promoted to special assistant for political action in the Western Hemisphere Division, which means Latin America, while Jake Engler became its chief of operations. Only a few officers retired and almost no one was fired. While there was plenty of complaints about the handling of the covert operation of the Bay of Pigs, it did not bring an end to the secret war against Castro. If anything, the administration seems to have redoubled its efforts. an ad hoc subcommittee of the NSC prodded Robert Kennedy, directly monitored the actions. The new operation was dubbed Mongoose, and it was ongoing. Although NSC directives following the Bay of Pigs made the Department of Defense primarily responsible for advice on activities, its operational role remained minimal. Edward Lansdale served as the Pentagon's contact man for matters concerning Operation Mongoose, coordinating military support as well as arranging for the agendas and keeping the records of the NSC Special Group, which effectively replaced the former 5412 group. For its part in Operation Mongoose, the CIA greatly expanded the Miami station, which retained its location in a colonial-style building on the South Campus of the University of Miami and its cover as an electronics firm. From Berlin, the agency brought in a new station chief, Theodore Shackley, who was soon running one of the CIA's largest operations ever with a known stated appropriated budget of over $50 million. Over 100 leased vehicles, several thousand Cuban exiles called Gladio agents, and over 300 American employees. The name of the front company was called Zenith Technical Enterprises, as it was, or JM Wave. So it's JM /Wave, WAVE, which was the operation code name within the agency. The CIA's mothership remained in service, the landing craft, and were soon supplemented by a fleet of 100 motorboats based in Miami throughout the Florida Keys. The paramilitary activities of the anti-Castro Cubans were more or less openly conducted, cloaked only by an array of political groups centered in Miami, because the operations was being ran out of the United States, where you're not allowed to do any CIA operations. The CIA was compelled to create a liaison with several different agencies at the federal, state, and local level in order to work through customs and local police. Conduct of the Operation Mongoose from within the United States inevitably involved daily violations of law, ranging from the CIA's National Security Act charter to the Neutrality Act, to statutes involving firearm possession and perjury. A frequent occupation of the JM Wave staff was bailing out, otherwise rescuing CIA or Cuban exiles when they got caught with shit they're not allowed to have. The use of the anti-Castro political group proved to be a double-edged sword. As paramilitary operations succeeded one another, most of them clearly beyond the exiles' capability, cover became increasingly threadbare because they talked all the time about all of it. The Cuban groups loved the association and the secrecy that was brought with it, and its association with the U.S. government, and even went to the extent sometimes of trying to extort favors, or telling reporters. The more immediate problem was that the CIA's relationship with and the assistance to the Cuban groups loosened the CIA's ability to control the covert war. Some attacks were carried out independently, even though the CIA may have canceled them. It was sometimes hard to tell if an action had occurred was either authorized or not. Many raids by the Cuban, because of course they're going for plausible deniability here. Many raids by Cuban groups like the 2nd Naval Guerrilla and Alpha 66 supposedly were not authorized. Yet once the CIA had provided training and equipment, the Castro government had some justification for its charges that the anti-Castro raids, independent or not, were all backed by the US, because they were. And I want you guys to, a lot of times it's hard for people when they're listening to something be described like this to then step back at the 20,000 foot look and think of where else this would apply. Because we've learned that these same types of people are trained to commit terror attacks like the Al Qaeda, like ISIS. So basically, they are creating a terror camp in the Florida Keys and running it out of the University of Miami. And they got a terrorist training camp out by Apalaka that we've already read about. So there's terrorist training camps all over the United States, all over South Florida, and they're bringing the purported terrorists referred to as Cuban exiles to these bases and training them to kidnap, torture, and murder people. Okay? Then they're putting them in your neighborhoods. And a lot of these people, over the course of the time during which this training was going on, would get in domestic disputes and kill people in their neighborhoods. They killed reporters that worked for the Miami Herald when they reported something that they weren't allowed to report, according to the CIA. These people were turned loose on Americans. These are the same people that are being trained that we're talking about right now that were sent up to Washington, D.C. to blow up Ambassador Lattier. These are the same people that were brought in to Watergate to frame President Nixon. So if you take this model as we learn about it and you apply it to them doing this with every single terrorist organization around the world, while they're camping out in Afghanistan, they set up terror training camps along the Pakistani border, and they were basically using U.S. money to pay the ISI, which is the Pakistani intelligence, to administer these camps, and then the CIA would direct the use of the graduates in terror events all over the world. Then we moved that operation, and we started doing it in Iraq after 91. Then we moved it and we started doing it again in different locations in Afghanistan, training the northern stands people like Tajikistan, Kazakhstan. We went up there and recruited a whole bunch of people and brought them into Afghani terrorist training camps. And they're still using those people. Those are the people that are being shuttled through Turkey that carried out the attack against Moscow, that theater. They came from Tajikistan. So this model has been used all over the world, domestically as well. I just didn't want that to get lost. Operation Mongoose peaked in the 18 months that separated the Bay of Pigs from the Cuban Missile Crisis. There were numerous attempts to infiltrate agents into Cuba. Most of them failed. There were several schemes aimed at assassinating Fidel Castro, and obviously those failed. Cargoes of Cuban sugar were contaminated with chemicals in San Juan, Puerto Rico, and other ports. Shipments of machinery or spare parts en route to Cuba were sabotaged, and there were commando raids against the Cuban railroads and sugar refineries. And who do we know was behind, who worked in that industry? William Polly, who, by the way, used his yacht to bring some of the saboteurs over to Cuba to do some of these raids. So all of this kind of stuff is going on. Now, again, you have the biggest country militarily in the world throwing $50 million worth of saboteurs and thousands of people attacking that little island. And they've not done anything to us, except for kick the oligarchs out and the mafia. And we are literally attacking it on a daily basis because the mafia is not allowed to use it as a drug stop and the oligarchs lost their playground. That's really what was behind all of this. It had nothing to do with Castro being communist at this point, because initially he was not. It was not until we began attacking him, like everybody else, that he calls up and asks the Soviets for help because he's being attacked every day. And if you recall, many of the politicians realize that this tactic, while it's effective in order to get the person that they want out of the government, that the real possibility of creating communists by using these tactics was a real deal. And most of them, like Brzezinski, when he would actually discuss that, pointed to Castro as the example that if you aren't able to get them, like, obviously they killed most of them or bribed them to leave the country like they did in Nicaragua or Guatemala. If you aren't able to get rid of them, you will turn them into a communist because they have nowhere else to go. So it's there or nowhere. The covert program helped exacerbate tensions between the US and the Soviet Union as well. The Bay of Pigs invasion was followed by an expansion of the Soviet military aid to Cuba. And again, it was not because the Soviet Union was the aggressor. They were not. They didn't give a shit about Cuba until Cuba came asking them for help because they were being attacked by the US. And most of our history teaches it as this was all kind of the Soviet Union's idea that they were being aggressive in putting missiles in Cuba to attack us, when that's not how it happened at all. The likelihood of the Soviet Union ever getting involved in Cuba, ever, had we not started attacking Castro, is zero. Maybe one or two. Very, very low. Okay. The Soviet Union selling missiles and other military supplies were instigated by Castro, and Castro probably would not have accepted any of it had he not been under attack by the United States. President Kennedy kept his distance from the paramilitary offensive, but his brother Bobby was at the forefront of the operations, prodding the planners to get moving, encouraging action within the NSC special group, even making field trips to visit the CIA facility in Florida. His enthusiasm fueled the secret war and won support from many that had been disgruntled about Operation Pluto's fiasco. Typically, among the people that Bobby worked with was Rip, R.I.P., Robertson, the CIA cowboy who thought little of politicians. He had met RFK during the Taylor Committee investigation and returned to tell the exiles that Kennedy was all right. Robertson went on to serve throughout the covert operation against Cuba. Operation Mongoose formally evolved from a list of 32 planning tasks assigned by Ed Lansdale on January 30th, 1962. By February 20th, there was a detailed 6-phase time schedule to culminate in open revolt against Castro before the end of the year. Lansdale became the chief of operations task force running Mongoose, with a CIA group under him called Task Force W and headed by William K. Harvey from the new CIA headquarters at Langley. Harvey supervised the activities of Ted Shackley's Miami station, With the pressures of organization, progress was slow, but by September, Mongoose was still only in its first phase, which was intelligence gathering. In a way, the administration's hand was then forced by one of the freelance strikes by a Cuban exile, acting on information that the Czech and Soviet officers gathered on Friday night for a party at Havana's hotel. Exiles determined to make a raid. 6 Cubans crammed in a speedboat with 2 50 caliber machine guns and a 20 millimeter cannon. They also had recoilless rifles. On August 24th, the exiles entered the suburban harbor of Miramar, got close enough to the hotel to see the lights in the ballroom and the uniforms, and shelled the place. Once exiles were mounting such missions on their own, it became even more difficult for the CIA to restrain those Cubans working for Task Force W. In early September, the NSC Special Group approved escalation to Phase 2, raids against Cuba, after they've already been doing them. One commando struck a power plant, and sharp arguments erupted as the Mongoose meetings in October 4th, when John McCone, the new director of Central Intelligence, charged that the NSC had been holding back the forces. Bobby Kennedy retorted that, to the contrary, the special group had urged and insisted upon action by the Lansdale operating organization, and that no specific action had ever been rejected at the NSC level. The October meeting concluded that more dynamic action was needed. Just 10 days later, the CIA U-2 reconnaissance plane flying over Cuba returned with photographs that showed equipment associated with the missiles. Operation Mongoose was swept away in the heat of the Cuban Missile Crisis. Robert Kennedy sat with his brother and other officials through an almost continuous series of meetings called Executive Committee of the NSC. The officials considered diplomatic approaches with the Russians and an invasion of Cuba, also a blockade and bombing. The secret warriors had their own brand of solutions for the new Cuban crisis. At the State Department, a man by the name of Robert A. Hurwitz, Hurwitch, who was a special assistant for Cuban affairs, recommended having the exile pilots bomb all of the missiles. Now, keep in mind, these were nuclear missiles. Oh my God, these people are crazy. Using unmarked planes and pretending that it was an attack on the oil refineries. At the CIA, Task Force W actually moved, very probably in response to the Mongoose directive, for more dynamic action and to place 10 commando teams of 6 men each in Cuba. Bill Harvey thought the teams could guide the U.S. invasion force when they landed. 3 teams had already left for points on the north coast of Cuba when one Cuban, who wanted assurances that the cause was good, phoned Robert Kennedy. The Attorney General, now facing a horrifying prospect of nuclear war, was not the gung-ho advocate of the covert action that he used to be. On October 30th, the NSC ordered a halt to all Mongoose operations. Lansdale was sent to Miami to close down the operation. There was no more talk, as there had been in October, for a plan to mine Cuban harbors. The missile crisis was eventually resolved at the highest level. The Soviets removed their offensive weapons from Cuba, and we took ours out from Turkey, because that was the other reason that the Soviet Union was pissed, is because we already had nuclear weapons in Turkey aimed at them. As for the covert forces in play, the CIA was ordered to reorganize again. William Harvey was removed from command of Task Force W to be replaced by Desmond Fitzgerald, an Asian expert, but an officer with more paramilitary experience. When Langley cut back on the Cuban operations for a time, the situation changed again early in 1963. During these events, the exile prisoners from the Bay of Pigs languished in Cuban prisons. Hurt by the trade embargo in place since January 1961, Castro offered to trade the prisoners for medicine, tractors, spare parts, and other things. Exchanges on the matter occurred repeatedly from 61 to 62. After the missile crisis, Castro's price came down while the administration threw its weight behind an effort to raise the $53 million worth of medical equipment, drugs, and baby food. The exchange was negotiated by lawyer James A. Donovan, who had arranged the trade of Soviet spy Rudolph Abel for CIA U-2 pilot Francis Gary Powers, which had taken place in 1962. The final agreement on the prisoner exchange was made on December 22nd, 1962. Some 1,179 veterans of Brigade 2506 returned to the U.S. In a covert twist within this game, CIA assassination planners bought a scuba diving suit to be presented to Castro as a gift by Donovan. At Langley's Technical Support Division, they had pregnated the suit with a fungus to cause a chronic skin disease and the breathing apparatus with tuberculosis cells. The suit was carried to Donovan by an unwitting lawyer, John Nolan, who learned of the ploy years later during the assassination investigations of the 1970s. Can you imagine? Nolan said. Can you imagine? Here is Jim Donovan, the guy who had already done his stuff once, a guy on the other side trust, down in Cuba trying to cut a deal in a very tough negotiation setting with delicate conversations. Everything has got to be above board because Fidel Castro held all the cards. And the CIA is setting Donovan up, not even telling him that what he was doing, and to hand a germ bag to Fidel Castro. Fortunately, the American lawyer, witting or not, took the precaution of replacing the diving suit with one that he had bought himself. Castro returned the prisoners, including 20 non-brigade agents of the CIA. So the CIA had 20 prisoners down there besides all the Cuban exiles. And if you guys remember, Robert Kennedy Jr. just recently posted a picture of his mother, which would be RFK's wife, posing with the Brigade 2506 upon their return to Miami from their imprisonment in Cuba. The Cuban government statements pointedly feared a new invasion by a larger, better equipped exile brigade. The U.S. denied that they had made any such plans, but in fact, there was another exile brigade organized by the American military, which had been trained under a special Cuban volunteer program since July 1961. In early 63, the program was handling a weekly influx of 200 Cuban exiles at a time. But what to do with the brigade was a key topic in the NSC meetings of January 25th, 1963, as the issues were summarized for Vice President Lyndon Johnson by his military advisor. The basic decision must be made as to whether an invasion of Cuba, directly or indirectly, is to be supported, and whether, to a lesser extent, serious provocations or incidents should be a part of the basic policy. When the decision is made, the disposition of the brigade can be easily determined. In other words, we have all these trained people. Are you going to use them or not? The basic decision was to restrict post-Mongoose actions to harassment of Cubans. And basically for the brigade to disappear. Only 128 Cubans volunteered for a special program between the beginning of 64 and the end of 65, by which time 2,947 had entered training in other areas. The anti-Castro aim of these Cubans was clearly demonstrated when only 61 of them continued in the U.S. military service after their training. The program was phased out in November 1965. So what they said, the deal that was struck with them, is all of them, which eventually ended up being almost 3,000 of them, had to join the military. And after they joined the army, they would be given their citizenship. And what he's saying is that only 61 of them decided to stay in the military because the majority of them came back and continued service with the CIA in other capacities, like Vietnam, like Felix Rodriguez. Raids against Cuban targets continued through 1963. Independent raids also remained a problem, subject only to rather haphazard controls. In 1962, for example, despite the existence of hundreds of boats that very probably carried out thousands of cruises, U.S. Customs, Coast Guard, and other authorities apprehended exactly 4 boats and 50 Cubans. It is very likely that these seizures were intended as lessons to the exiles to follow the orders of their CIA controllers. Independent raids in March 1963 caused serious damage to the Soviet merchant ship, leading to a diplomatic protest. Secretary of State Dean Russ declared in a letter discussed at the NSC meeting in March 29, "I am concerned that hit-and-run raids by Cuban exiles may create incidences that would work to our disadvantage. Increased frequencies of these incidences could raise a host of problems." So basically, there's a bunch of them going rogue, attacking crap down in the Caribbean. The Colombian operation began to die away as sensitivity to the problems of control increased. Continuing official support by the U.S. only served to encourage the exiles. There were periodic strikes, the NSC discussions as late as 1965 of the government's attention to increasingly draw the Southeast Asia and Cuba, going to Southeast Asia and leaving Cuba behind. The CIA bases in Miami and the Florida Keys closed down one by one. Ending the CIA secret war did not in the case in the paramilitary activities. Exile groups continued on their own with sporadic attempts and harassments at Cuba. In the mid-1960s, one mission was even financed by an American magazine just for the journalist scoop to achieve getting an article. Exile groups merged, they split, they renewed their memberships, they conducted their own training. And in the 1970s, a new group called Omega 7 carried out assassinations of opponents and other Cuban diplomats assigned to the UN in New York. As a result, the Cuban operations and secret warriors succeeded in creating a cadre with military skills, a cadre that far outlasted the operations themselves. Cuban pilots later flew B-26 bombers for the CIA in the Congo to kill Lumumba, and for the Portuguese elsewhere in Africa, like Mozambique, Angola, where they were orchestrating coups as well. Cuban enlisted in the abortive invasion of Haiti back in the late 1960s. Cubans were available to be recruited by the Republican campaign officials in the 72 intelligence effort for Watergate. And this guy acts like that none of this is related. These were Gladio operators on standby for use for CIA operations. This was all coordinated. It's not like they're, Uber drivers down in Miami and occasionally get a call. These are operatives. They were paid on a monthly salary to be ready to deploy anywhere in the world to do CIA operations. And we know that because we followed all of the operations that they flew all over the world to conduct. So he mentions Watergate with Bernard Barker, E. Howard Hunt, and another guy, Rolando Martinez, who all participated in many of the CIA operations against Castro. And as recently as early 1980s, Bay of Pig veterans filed lawsuits against the U.S. government seeking military benefits for the couple of years that they did military duty to get their citizenship. Most recently, Cuban Americans have been a major private funding source for an effort by Nicaraguan Contras to overthrow the Sandinistas government. Not just a funding source. They actually went down there. Felix Rodriguez was running operations. Cubans provided paramilitary training for some of the Contras, and that some of the Cubans worked in the CIA through the mining campaign of Nicaragua, but it was actually Navy SEALs that mined the actual harbor. So that's it. That concludes chapter 11 and this author's history lesson about our secret war against Cuba. So let's see, anybody want to come up and have any discussions about that or anything else that's going on? SR 71, go ahead.
Thank you, Colonel. I'd like to read something here real quick, if you don't mind.
Not at all.
In a little bit of the research that I did. You mentioned CIA domestic operations. And here's what came up when I did a query here. The Central Intelligence Agency has a domestic wing known as the National Resource Division, which conducts operations within the United States. Although the CIA is primarily focused on gathering intelligence from foreign nations, it has performed domestic operations to achieve its goals. Some of these operations were controversial and only became known to the public years after they were conducted. For example, starting in 1950, the CIA researched and experimented with mind-controlled drugs and other chemical, biological, and radiological stimuli on both willing and uninformed subjects. These programs were aimed to investigate whether and how it was possible to modify an individual's behavior by covert means. That operation, by the way, was called Operation Chaos.
Yep.
So if anybody here believes the CIA isn't involved in what's going on in the U.S., there's news for you. It hasn't stopped.
That is true. Sure. No, thank you for adding that. They've done a lot inside the United States. Most recently, the 4 soft coups against President Trump. Every one of them has CIA fingerprints. The COVID-19 has CIA fingerprints. All of this stuff that we're living through right now, it's just a matter of time. You can be 99% accurate by saying every single thing that happens around us that is of this nature is CIA. There may be 1% that is somebody else, but the majority, hands down, it's just a matter of time until the proof comes out. So, Bridget, did you have anything?
Just, can you briefly, just for the audience, explain how, JM Wave is covered in here, but the breadth of JM Wave was a particularly nefarious situation with the CIA, because it also connected with, as I recall, the schools, it was not just a matter of trying to push out propaganda.
Well, no, JM Wave was actually the operation to overthrow Castro. It really had very little to do with propaganda. It was an actual operation. Because basically, the Operation Pluto was, you can think of it like this. They had pre-positioned, Operation Pluto was more like what we did with Panama, where we have a fake government, or like what we did with Katanga in the Congo, where they have a fake government already in quote unquote exile, and they're going to get a few people into the country with the hopes that there are other people that will rise up. And in the midst of the quote unquote civil war that ensues, they're going to install this government that had been in exile that the US had already recognized onto the island, and then continue to throw shit at it until eventually Castro has to cry uncle, because of course we can outgun him any day of the week. That was the Pluto. JM Wave was basically a full out operation to overthrow the government, like we did in Chile. It was, they threw everything at it. They were going to interfere because, see, at the time, this was all fairly new. They didn't know whether Castro was going to try to have elections or exactly how he was going to lead the country. And as soon as he made it clear to them that he wasn't going to allow the mafia back in, nor was he going to allow the oligarchs that had confiscated all the people's land in bullshit land deals, and he was out. And so that operation, JM Wave, was basically an all-out covert war. You can think of it as an actual war. It was just done covertly, and it had every part of a war footing associated with it. Does that help?
Yes, ma'am.
Yeah, and so you had the people like and keep in mind, Lyman Lemmisker is still the Joint Chiefs of Staff at this point. And he's providing all of the military support, like ferrying people back and forth to different places, because they had, remember that we're still using at this time Swan Island for a communication site, the like tiny island with this ginormous antenna on it for the propaganda piece of it. And we still have training bases that we're teaching people how to do the paramilitary activity at this point. So they also had, and this just blew my mind when I found out about it, but they also had a whole bunch of covert military equipment, like even I'm thinking it's F-105s. I'm pretty sure it is, at Homestead Air Force Base. And so I try to think about this, having spent 30 years on Air Force bases. How do you explain away walking onto a military base that, may have whatever they had at the time? I know they eventually ended up with F-16s. But whatever it is, even if it was F-105s at the time that was stationed there, and you have all of these other F-105s that your air crew never flies, these mysterious people that aren't in your fighter squadron shows up and gets in them and flies them around. Because all of these pilots have to stay qualified, even if you're a CIA pilot. They obviously don't have the same qualifications as an Air Force person does, but they still have to fly them, because you have to fly them in order to keep them running. And so I just find it fascinating that, a normal fighter wing has X number of planes. And if that X number of planes for that particular model is 20, and your base has 40, and 20 of them you're never allowed to fly, wouldn't somebody go, what the fuck is those planes doing out here? And who are these people showing up to fly them? I've never been at a base like that. It just blows my mind that that would have been the case. SR-71.
Thank you, Colonel. I can add a little more to JM Wave here. One of our favorite names, Theodore Shackley, was the one who headed JM Wave up from 62 to 65.
Yep.
And that place grew to be the largest CIA station in the world at the time, that had 300 to 400 professional operatives, about 100 based in Cuba, and 15,000 anti-Castro Cuban exiles on the payroll.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Sure. Yeah, it's just crazy. And I find it interesting that somebody that obviously was as important to all of these operations, and I don't mean just Operation Gladio, I'm talking about William Polly, who ends up being an ambassador. And he just so happens to be an ambassador in several countries where coups occur. And he's, a multi millionaire, selling airplanes around Southeast Asia. And we've never heard of the guy until we stumbled across him. I'd never heard anybody talk about him. And his name's literally on everything. It's just crazy how often we come across him. Because obviously he lived down in Miami, and he was part of JM Wave as well. I mean, he worked with them directly. So it's crazy. Stellar, go ahead.
I'm kind of really blown away because of all of these different things that have been happening from back then that are still going on today. It's almost like they tested all these different things in all these different places as they were doing their stuff here in the United States, which is now blown up in that respect. But I mean, it's mind blowing. Was Castro someone that they couldn't control? Is that why? Because
so
I'm confused.
Yeah, I've offered two versions of that. And honestly, I don't know which of the two it is. Because again, we all have to keep an open mind on all of this, because literally my impression of some things, something about this entire picture changes almost on a daily basis with something else that I read or something that Bridget or Cousin It finds. So you just really have to keep an open mind. So my two hypothesis is that he was someone they could not control. Everybody that knew him originally, when he was in the mountains learning to fight and was going to throw off Batista's government, said that everything he said was the right thing to say. And that he meant it. He was a lawyer. He gave up his law practice to go be a rebel. And that he wanted to stop having the women and children being prostituted to the mafia, which is what was happening. They would basically human traffic kids and women into anybody that came and stayed in the casinos and the hotels and stuff like that. And it just so happens that William Polly was in charge of transportation, not making any allegations. That's a little weird. And of course, he owned several plantations there. He owned the airline. So if we needed to traffic anybody in and out, perfectly done on his airline. Okay. So again, no allegations, just saying it's a real possibility. So when that gets shut down, everybody's pissed off. And when they try to work with the CIA agent that had been in the mountains training and equipping Castro, his brother, and Che Guevara, when they were successful, the CIA is still basically talking with him. And he makes it very clear he's not going to get bought. And that pisses them off. Okay, so if you stop right there, everything prior to that I just said is true. There is also the possibility that from that point on, while there was a deal made, that he can put up he can stay in charge. And we did this with royalty, like in Jordan and Morocco. The UK did that. So it's not unprecedented. But we're going to use you to play a role. And that role that you're going to play is that of a communist in our neck of the woods, so that I want to steal all of the shit in Latin America, but I need a boogeyman to do it. And if I have a boogeyman in my back door, then that gives me the impetus to go down there and be able to say, oh my God, Allende's a communist. I don't want another Castro, so we've got to get rid of him. They go into Nicaragua. Oh my God, that guy's a communist. I got to get rid of him. They go it. And meanwhile, every place they go, they're stealing shit. They're taking the resources. They're writing unfair concessions to pump all their oil, take all the rubber out of Brazil, blah, blah, blah. And that actually did happen. But I find it awful convenient because I don't trust anybody's narratives anymore. I find it awful convenient that Cuba just happened to turn quote unquote communist right exactly at the same time we needed the boogeyman in our backyard in order for Nelson Rockefeller to take all the shit down there and steal everything. So I am open to both of those lines of thinking. And if I had to put a percentage on it, I don't know that I could, because I think one's just as likely as the other because they've done it before. They've done both of those before. So I'm keeping an open mind until everything gets declassified. SR71.
Thank you, Colonel. There's still something that puzzles me about this book. It opens with Operation Pluto. Operation Pluto, when it was discovered what was going on, they renamed the operation to Operation Zapata. Yeah. That's never mentioned. And then it goes to Operation Mongoose, which is mentioned. So I'm beginning to wonder if somewhere in this book, this guy isn't trying to save Bush.
So I did notice that, and I do think that's very interesting as well. So let me kind of fill in a little bit more of that. So for those of you who don't know, Zapata is a bay in Cuba. And that bay was supposedly suspected of having a very large amount of oil just off the coast of Cuba. And the coastal area being Zapata Bay. And so Bush, right around the time all this shit is happening, because it's in the 60s, is opening up at an oil company called Zapata Oil. Now, there are people that believe that the whole story is that they thought Castro was going to be more cooperative, and that Bush's company called Zapata Oil was going to be the concession given company to go and extract the oil, or at least look for the oil off the coast of Cuba, which, because they now don't control Cuba because Castro got in the way and wouldn't work with them after that. Because keep in mind, Bush is part of the CIA when all this is happening. We don't know where he's at, but we definitely know he's part of the CIA. And so there are a lot of people that believe that it is not a coincidence that Operation Zapata, Zapata Bay, Zapata Oil all have something to do with each other.
And I just wanted to tell everybody over on Rumble, there's actually a message over on, I'm trying to get rid of a spammer that is pretending to be you. And they're directing them over to a Telegram channel. So if they tell you anything or offer anything to tell, please just ignore this person. We've reported them, but unfortunately Rumble is always slow to get rid of them.
Oh, I don't even see them.
Actually, it's in the comment section underneath some of the, well, quite a few of your other older videos.
Oh, but they're not in the live chat right now?
Not in the live chat right now.
Okay.
Apparently they know better.
Okay. Yeah. All right. Well, thank you for doing that. Let's see. I don't know. Adam, go ahead.
Hey, Colonel.
Hey.
Good evening. I've been, I binge on videos. I don't watch TV. I watch videos, and with Jacob, not Jacob, Rockefeller, John D. Rockefeller. One of his footmen, I was learning, his name is Jacob A. Schiff.
Yeah.
He's kind of like a footman.
Yeah.
Like he'd do the footwork. He helped, like, from my understanding, like the whole Communist Manifesto or Das Kapital, they had that, like, they pretty much Marx, like he went to Marx, he went to Lenin, all these people, like he helped push out for Rockefeller, from my understanding. Have you heard of Jacob A. Schiff? No relation to Adam Schiff.
That we know of, but yes, I've heard about him.
That we know of, yeah. Right?
Yeah.
Okay, cool. Yeah, I've been like doing my research as well, like looking not as pensive as you, but I've been watching videos on this stuff while I go to sleep. Okay, cool.
Yeah.
Anything interesting about him? Because he seems to be like the guy that did the footwork for Rockefeller and the CFR and what was it? Bank of International Settlement and all that stuff that they set up.
Yeah, he definitely was in the middle of the post World War II. Well, let me go back. So there's a couple. The first Adam. Now you got me doing it. So I'm looking back at my notes because he came up when we were doing the secret societies. His real name is Jacob with a K, Heinrich Schiff. But this one, the original one, is he was born in the middle part of the 1800s and only lived to the 1920, and that's kind of the his family goes back further, okay, and they were all bankers, and he is a Ashkenazi Jewish person from Germany that also practiced in the London synagogue. So after the Civil War, he came over to the United States. He becomes a citizen over here, and he's working with the same people that eventually produce Wild Bill Donovan of the OSS, Allen Dulles, and John Foster Dulles. So all of these people are basically hobnobbing together, right?
I think the Warburg as well, right?
Oh gosh, yeah, he comes up in because I'm doing the thread part. I think I'm on part 4 or 5 on the Warburgs. So they're basically all in this together, and he has a son who is Mortimer Schiff, and he also was very involved in the Boy Scouts, and he's the father of Dorothy Schiff, which, for those of you guys that are following the kind of secret society thing, she comes up a couple of different times as well. She comes up in relationship to, let's see, Thomas Dewey and Averell Harriman and Nelson Rockefeller and blah, blah, blah. So they are all also, she's the one that sold the New York Post to Rupert Murdoch. So that's a crazy family. I mean, you could probably do you know, a 6-month deep dive just on that family alone. That's a crazy family.
Yeah. Oh man. One thing that Rockefeller did with the CFR, like pretty much anybody that's with these people is like coming out of the CFR as well. And I looked at the presidents that like came out of there, and it's been like pretty much. Well, Hillary surprisingly wasn't from the CFR. She, you know, Bill is though. Trump isn't. He hasn't done any events with them or anything, which is pretty interesting there.
Keep in mind where the CFR came from. Although Rockefeller is the one behind it in the United States, the CFR is the brother of the Royal Institute of International Affairs, the RIIA of London. And those two organizations were set up by the British Round Table, the Fabian Society, Cecil Rhodes, that created, basically, they're the grandfather of Operation Gladio too. So Operation Gladio is the paramilitary force that does what the CFR and the RIIA decides wants done.
They indoctrinate them through the like Rhodes Scholar and Oxford,
yes.
pretty much.
Yes.
Into that communist
yes.
or like ideal.
Well, it's more fascist. It is not communist. Fascist. Yeah. Well, that's an important distinction for anybody that's new. This is something that we need to understand because words matter. A communist, which they love to throw around as the boogeyman to justify paramilitary, a communist government is a government that basically has no private industry. It is a command and control government that runs everything, right? They don't have competition. It's you're going to work all day. You're going to get a set amount of money. You know, all the shit that the Democrat Party, the living wage and all that shit that they're trying to do.
The UBI.
Yeah. So the universal basic income, that's communism. If you basically feed, clothe, and provide a job from the government to people, that's communism. None of the powerful people want communism. They just use communism as a tool to create fear to control us. None of them want communism. They want a version of fascism that is very close to the totalitarian model that was implemented in Italy by Mussolini. And the difference is that they all still have a job. So you notice that if the government owns everything, those guys are just worker bees too, unless they're in the Politburo as a bureaucrat. They don't have billions and billions of dollars to fly around the world and do whatever the hell they want with, because their company is now owned by the government. And they would have to be a government worker in order to work in their company, even if it's in charge of their company. They don't want that. They want their lifestyle to remain the same, and they want all of us enslaved to make sure their lifestyle remains the same. What they don't like is competition, which is why they implement regulations, because regulations increases the cost of going into business. Because if you go into a regulated business like a utility, if you don't have billions of dollars to get in the door, mom and pop can't do it. So they want all the regulations that they can get. Same thing with trucking. You know, back in the day when trucking was regulated, it was hard it was basically impossible. You had to lease your truck. If you're an owner operator, you had to lease your truck and join a union in order to be able to be a truck driver. When trucking got deregulated and people could own their own trucks and make their own living, then they could work as hard as they wanted based on, you know, they still had regulations for the amount of hours you're allowed to be on the road. But a deregulated market lowers the cost of entrance and increases the amount of competition. They hate that. So that's the reason why they want the internet regulated, because it increases the cost of getting into a business. And therefore, they become basically by default monopolies without having the title of a monopoly. And so it's very, very important. There is a huge difference between fascism, which still has private businesses, but they collude with the government, which you saw over the last 4 years, for the government to do what they want them to do and for them to do what the government wants them to do. They are one cohesive organization behind the scenes, but they still all appear to be private, and that allows them to use us as slaves. Communism doesn't allow anybody to be a slave except for all of us to be a slave to the greater good, supposedly, of the entire apparatus. So that is, to me, a huge difference in, are they both? It still requires a dictator. So there are some commonalities. You can't have a totalitarian or a fascist government without a dictator in charge, because we won't stand it. We want our freedom. And as a result of that, we demand certain things. And the problem, which kind of is the irony of all of this research that we've done, is if you go back and you look, and even Paul Williams admitted this point, if you go back and you look at the leaders that were assassinated by the CIA under the guise of them being communist, you cannot find a single communist among them. What they wanted was the things that you and I talk about all the time. They wanted their farmlands not owned by a foreign government. They wanted decent wages for the people working in the mines that had been, whose concessions had been given to foreign countries that basically used things like the CIA to come in and create havoc, so that every time a union tried to form, it was infiltrated and sabotaged, and the unions got labeled through media, usually not owned by the country either. Outside foreign governments controlled their media. Like in Chile, we actually owned the largest, we meaning a U.S. company, the largest media that was constantly accusing Allende of being a communist, and the labor union that was trying to form for the copper union that was a U.S. concession. It was managed by a U.S. company who was paying pennies on the dollar to the workers, and they were dying in the mines, and they weren't doing anything about it. So the fact that they wanted a labor union got labeled as being a communist, which is, to me, ironic, since those same people that were doing all of this allowed and applaud, the labor unions here. So that tells you that our labor unions are fake. Because if they loved labor unions, they'd love labor unions everywhere.
They just want us. That's what it is. They want anything and everything that we have, even future stuff, and they just want us dead. These people suck. And everything gets switched around because the South is getting so confused about stuff, because you see these things, and then the propaganda is
David, can you mute your mic, please, David?
David, can you mute your mic? Yeah, thank you. Go ahead.
No, I was just saying that they keep, they use the word communism to get everyone scared.
Yeah.
But in actuality, like you said, it's the fascism. They want that control, but they also want us all dead. So, or just
no,
just whatever is left.
Yeah, they don't want us all dead, because then they'd have to do work for themselves. But the Fabian Society was very clear. They want a unified world government. And they wanted it broken up into pieces, as they dictated, and that those regional commanders, for lack of a better word, was going to form, and all of the Americas would be in one entity, and they would work off of the same premise. And again, the only way you do that is using a dictator with raw power that has the ability to coerce people to do stuff that they wouldn't ordinarily do if they value their independence, their religion, and their freedom. All right. I see any more hands? Anybody else got anything else to go ahead, Adam?
So, I totally get what you're saying with the communism. It's a boogeyman that they went around the world pretty much using as a,
So I'm not saying
a reason.
Yeah, I'm not saying communism doesn't exist. It does, that definitely.
Yeah.
And we had communists. But these people don't want communism. They want fascism.
Yeah,
Yeah.
100%.
Yeah.
It's like, communism's bad, yes, but that's just what they're like. They're what they're using as kind of guys to go do what their deeds that they want to do.
So right.
So 100%, I agree with you there. It is bad, but they're just using it as a fear mongering tool for us to go on these sort of.
It's a propaganda campaign.
Essentially.
Yeah, it's a propaganda campaign. So I would say the same thing about when they modified NSC 5412-2 to include terrorism. It got added to the boogeyman list. So now you have your choice. You can designate someone a communist, or you can designate them a terrorist. And all you have to do with that designation is seek the approval from whatever the working group happens to be at the time, based on the administration. And then the CIA, have the ability to assassinate them, take them out, neutralize them. And that's the whole purpose of that NSC memorandum. So those words matter. They didn't add the word fascist. They added the word communist. And if you're going to use that as a enemy designation, which they did, you have to have a propaganda campaign to go along with it, because they're not going to use it for what it was originally, what you and I would think they would use it for in the real cases of there actually being a communist that you want to take out. They're going to use it as a designation to take out whoever they want. If they're going to do that, there has to be a propaganda campaign that goes along with it in order to make you afraid of them. And that happened when they added the word terrorist. So there's going to be a propaganda campaign, and that propaganda campaign will include terrorist operations, just like Operation Gladio occurred throughout Europe, perpetrated by their own independent little cells in all of the different countries. And the US was not excluded from that as well. So you actually have to have events in order to convince people that they have to be afraid of that. Just having little kids crawl under their desk for fallout drills when you're growing up isn't enough. There's going to have to be some events that are associated with that evil where people die in order to psychologically traumatize people into actually being scared of it. So, and on that part, they did a really good job. They sucked at the Bay of Pigs, but they did a really good job on the psychological part of it. But, they used Bernays and all of the experts in order for them to develop those kind of operational plans. So they definitely didn't spare any expense on that part.
There was something in one of the videos that I was watching a couple days ago where they're talking about Jacob A. Schiff and the Germany and Poland, like the northeast area, to coax that kind of Cold War sort of thing. I'm not specifically familiar. I think I fell asleep at that part, but anything about that, like with Poland and Germany to kick that off and start Hitler's campaign across Europe, with France and all those areas.
That's a that's a whole space in and of itself.
Yeah. Okay. So dig into that. Okay.
Yeah. Yeah, that's definitely a whole space in and of itself. That's not an easy answer. But anyway, I see we've got David. Did you have something that you wanted to say? I don't see your hand up. I don't know if you've raised it or just came up to be a speaker.
Well, I was gonna say something, but I thought I'd just listen to you kids and know everything about it. So it's interesting. The opinions everybody has on different subjects in having to do with the CIA and the military, which aren't a hell of a lot different. You know, most of the, like when we came back to Vietnam, most of the guys that were in counterintelligence or any of the intel fields were offered jobs with the CIA, except that they wanted you to take 6 weeks or 6-month course with them, and then right back to Vietnam for another 18 months. And so a lot of the guys just got out, but some of them stayed in. And I have friends that have been in all their careers. And I have friends that retired out of the Secret Service. And so you get insights into some of it. Not, you know, you're not read into it like you were, but we all signed that 20-year with the military and 30-year with the CIA non-disclosure agreements. So, you know, but it's so compartmentalized, everything that's done within those organizations. But it all comes from the president. You know, anybody that thinks that it occurs within the organization itself, by itself, doesn't know it very well.
Well, David, I'm going to agree with you about 95% of the time, but there have been operations ran without the president's knowledge under the plausible deniability. So there's no records of the president actually knowing. And so, like you said, because it's compartmentalized and much of it's still classified, you'd be hard pressed to prove that the president knew about quite a few of the operations. Not to say that he didn't, but there is no proof that he did, and it's set up that way.
Yeah, it's set up that way, but it's him that actually gives the ultimate clearance. Otherwise, he can declassify it anytime he wants.
He definitely could, but none of them do they? Because they know that once they do, yeah. Well, but once they do declassify it and they expose the people that are doing it, then they're dead meat too. So it's kind of a double-edged sword.
Well, you know, the only one that really bothered me was when Kennedy got killed, and I'm not a Kennedy fan per se, but there's little question where that came from, at least in our minds. Of the guys I know, how he got killed and who killed him.
Okay. Very, very interesting conversation. We've definitely talked about it on several different occasions.
Well, I mean, you know, it's first of all, yeah. If you knew what Johnson was like physically as a person and what kind of guy he was. He was a bully, a great big beast of a guy, 6'6".
Yeah, I know.
260. Okay.
Yeah, we've talked all about him.
I know, but if you've ever seen the guy, he was just a mean, fat pig of a guy.
Yeah, well, you can see him in pictures and in
You can see him in pictures, but you can't.
No, you can see him in the videos. There's actually. You know, I mean, he was on television. You can see in comparison with other people.
I've seen him physically. And so I guess there was a little question in any of our minds how this transpired.
Well, he had his own personal assassin.
Well, he hated, first of all, he hated the way the Kennedys were, the way they lived. If you've ever been down to that farmhouse he lived in, he was just in a.
I have been. I was stationed in San Antonio. Yeah.
Not exactly Hyannisport.
Yeah.
So, I mean, that was an incredible jealousy.
Yeah, but there's a whole lot of other things that.
Oh yeah, there's all kinds of theories that it came from Cuba. That
No, I'm not talking about theories. I'm talking about foreign situations that were going on at the time that exacerbated the situation that was.
Russia did not like what was going on.
Well, I'm talking more about places that the CIA were actively working on coupping the government, like in Indonesia, and
most of them aren't set up to handle that.
Most of them are not set up to handle what?
Because that was an obvious obfuscation of the you've been to where he's got shot. For Christ's sakes, an idiot would have covered that building. A blind idiot.
Are you telling me the same people were in charge as the one that they did for Trump? The same blind idiot didn't cover that building?
Not the same people, but the same setup. Yeah.
The same blind idiot didn't cover that building?
Well, normally there are 4 sniper teams. There were 2. To think that you would not cover a building that is obviously again, a guy with a 22 could have shot him.
Yeah. All right. Well, let's move on. We got some other hands. Mike, what you got?
Hey, Carl, I just wanted to add for the discussion you guys are talking about, especially what David added, with things being so compartmentalized for those that may not understand why that's particularly important is I'm going to refer I tend to refer a lot of my stuff to Hollywood because a lot of people have seen a lot of movies. If you've seen the Jason Bourne film that has Jeremy Renner in it, he talks with a scientist that she talks about how she doesn't know what happens within the virus technology that they're working on because everything is so siloed, compartmentalized, and that's particularly important to what you guys were discussing here with like the success of Colonel. You said the success of like the psychological warfare aspect of the CIA, even though they failed so egregiously at other formats, is that by keeping things siloed and compartmentalized, they can steer the relationships between the other silos and the compartments however they want because the individuals within those silos do not understand what is going on with the end product. Exactly. And one of those would be, I think probably one of the biggest reasons that the psychological aspect has been so successful is one, the initiative with MK Ultra on understanding how the utilization of light can help manipulate psychology within the public, but then also the successes of the big pharma industry that was built by Germany in the 1920s that led to the Roaring 20s, that led to the Great Depression, that allowed for the collapse of the Weimar Republic and the rising of Nazi Germany and Hitler's power. And the other thing would be how they used the Germans that were not only the ones that built those pharmaceutical companies that became titans of industry, but also they would have been very instrumental with the provisioning of methamphetamines for the Nazi Empire, and then using them for Operation Paperclip to get over to the U.S. and abroad to continue the spreading and the kind of covert fascism that you're talking about. Because if memory serves me right, the Germans were also not fans of the Russians either. So and it's important everybody understand all these different relationships. So they can understand the battlefield that we're talking about, because Big Pharma has played a massive role with how much of the American population is particularly addicted to SSRIs currently, and how that's going to affect the psychology when you're talking about mass formation hypnosis and the utilization of the Mockingbird media to really steer how everybody's thinking.
Those are excellent points. Thank you, Mike. That's a great thumbnail sketch of why that's all very, very important. Tim, go ahead.
Hey, Colonel, what's your take on John Ratcliffe? You think he's a good guy?
I do. And in my limited research on him, couple things. The primary reason is because of he was the only one of all of the intelligence agencies. So, when Trump asked during his first term for the intelligence on how the COVID virus was formed, he got basically 17 different versions of it, none of which acknowledged the fact that it was not a wet market Chinese product. And John Ratcliffe, as the DNI, was the only person that told the truth. He said out loud and was basically, squashed by the intelligence apparatus that, as a matter of fact, they wouldn't even let him unclassify it originally. That it was man-made and that it didn't come from a wet market. If you've got enough courage to do that, I'm going to say that you have at least the integrity to be in that job. And he doesn't owe anybody in that organization. One of the things after doing this 2-year research project and reading 82 different books about the CIA, you understand that, and I understand from spending 30 years in the military, and I'm going to use the word good old boy network and how that works. There are people that you do not go up against if you value your career. If you have aspirations above where you're currently at, there are people that, and the McCain dynasty is a great example of that. 3 or 4 generations of not just in the Navy, like admiral in the Navy. And so if you are going to be in the Navy with the kid who has, 4 or 3 flag officer relatives, that might not be the person you want to piss off. And that's how bureaucracies work. In the military, if nothing else, is a bureaucracy. The CIA is not much different. And from their cloak and dagger, we've seen where they get rid of their own when they become no longer useful to them, either through pinning a crime on them like they did with Edwin Wilson, or just, getting rid of them. So that took an immeasurable amount of courage for him to do that. So I'm fine with it. And I think it's an added bonus. Some people will say that it's going to be a limiting factor, that he doesn't have the inside knowledge. But it depends on what the end state of that agency is. And I can tell you what I hope the end state of that agency is. But we'll see. Anyway.
If they get outed in any of these D-class coming up, he's going to be the point man.
If what gets outed?
Yeah. Well, thank you.
I didn't understand what you meant, Tim. If what gets outed?
In the D-class, any kind of CIA involvement in, what they've been doing. Ratcliffe's going to be at the helm while
right.
the investigation goes in.
Right. But I don't understand your point. What about it?
I just hope he does the right thing,
Well, he's going to do the right thing, I believe, which is why he's got the job.
Thank you.
Sure. I'm going to give him the benefit of the doubt at this point. I reserve the right to be wrong. Okay. All right, guys, I got to run. thanks for being here. We'll be back tomorrow at 4 to continue. Did I just do it oh, I'm covering up my books. I had to find my pen. We are moving on. The next area is the Cold War and counterinsurgency. So we're going to go over a few operations that began after that time period. Some of which is going to be ones that you'll recognize, like the overthrow of the Congolese government by the CIA, i.e. Lumumba and Mubatu, and that whole fiasco. We'll talk about that. Then we'll go into Vietnam and move on from there.
And tonight is Time with Alpha.
Tonight is my Alpha date. So we are going to be continuing the conversation. I don't know what I did with my notes. They're here somewhere. Tune in. It's going to be good. Oh, but I do have a couple others. I am going to be talking to, in the next few days, a couple of people that have been involved in the January 6th thing. I will, when my neighbor's niece and nephew get back, try to get them on one of our podcasts. You definitely want to hear their story. It's one of the, it pisses me off every time I think about it. But anyway, all right. So we've got Alpha Warrior tonight at 9:30. I will be doing a podcast with War Hamster tomorrow at noon. I will be doing a podcast with a program called the Daily 302 at 7 o'clock tomorrow night. And I'll send you guys all of the information on that. I will also.
More news on Paul Williams?
No, he said he's going to get back to me in the next couple of days. He had a pretty solid week this week, so maybe we'll get him back next week. At 9 o'clock tomorrow night, I will be on the sit rep with Alpha and CanCon, and we're going to talk about the executive orders. He just contacted me before we went live today and asked me to do that. And then this weekend, there's one more here somewhere. What did I do with it? Okay. Larry Brock, who is a former A-10 pilot, and we are going to do a podcast together about January 6th at 7 o'clock on Sunday night. So just for you guys' planning purposes. That's what it looks like right now. So tomorrow at noon with War Hamster, then our normal 4 o'clock. And then tonight, 9:30 with Alpha. So tomorrow's going to be really busy. All along.
But it's always great with Alpha.
Yeah. All along, I'm going to let you talk, but I do have to run in like 5 minutes because tonight's my dinner night with my family. So go ahead.
Earl, I've never been one to intentionally disrupt your digestion. I just want to mention really fast that in the essential book, JFK and the Unspeakable by James W. Douglas, which is a book that was kicked off literally 2 national television networks, censored utterly, PBS and NBC. He's basically saying, look, the CIA and the Pentagon rigged it so the Bay of Pigs landing would be intentionally a failure and have the military waiting off the coast for an invasion. And that was all planned to kind of force JFK's hand into a U.S. Marine invasion of Cuba, and JFK rejected that. So I'm gonna post the pages there in the bubble later on, and I hope you have a fine dining experience.
Thank you all along. Yeah, I've heard a lot of people make that argument too, because if you go back and you look at most CIA operations, they're not amateur. They're not always successful, but they're not amateur. And there was a lot of things that really, and I mean, we've talked about them. The fact that they're changing the plan on the 11th hour, and we learned, you know, in several of these books that we went over, but in this book specifically last week yesterday, about the you know, change of the landing area at the last minute, the fact that they didn't even disguise the aircraft. It was recognized by a junior reporter as not even being a Cuban, so that the whole second wave of bombings didn't occur, not because JFK called them off. He had to call them off because they were all exposed. But that's just not the story you get. And so anyway, bringing this information is just something that I think we desperately need collectively to understand how we got to where we're at today. But anyway, thank you all for being here. I will see you tonight at 9:30 if you tune into the Alpha Warrior Show over on his Rumble channel at the Alpha Warrior Program. And then we'll be back tomorrow at noon with War Hamster and 4 o'clock here to continue our book review series. Thank you. Take care, everybody. Okay, back to y'all. What did I do with my, I always lose my tab here so I can read there we go. I can read the comments. I bring something else up and it disappears. Okay. It's recorded on the Alpha Warrior. Oh, Mager Sarge is over here. Sit rep. Yeah, I love doing sit rep. I love both of them. Ratcliffe as DNI was tasked to collect and report intelligence. Yep. Let's see. All right. The Ritz, drugs that damage the cell brain. I think most of them do. My personal opinion. All right, guys, take care. I will see you guys tonight or tomorrow.